silvery type. But they were
His manuscripts
wonderful.
look like Solzhenitsyn's.
But they were wonderful stories.
It's like-
The editors would say, "I'm not going to."
It's like he was
well,
an
I wanna buy
Alfred
it."
Davidson apprentice or something.
But you had to read it. I should mention about the dedication to strangers. I read somewhere there were these two famous authors who agreed that they would praise each other's work on every possible occasion without actually reading it. And I thought that was a great idea, and I mentioned it to Gardner, and we agreed on that. And so if you read Strangers, if you ever see the printed copy, it says to Tom and Sarah Purdom, who won't read this one either. But actually, I did read it. I had read the novella, and I thought it was really a fine piece of writing. Okay, I want to mention something regarding Gardner as editor. Whatever may have been the bleakness of his vision in his writing, I don't think that came across as an editor. And in fact, I am considered, I think most of the stories that he bought of mine were generally on the upbeat, optimistic side by the science fiction standards, and that this is not really, his personal vision did not circumscribe his editing.
This was evident from the very beginning. The first book he ever edited, he was an anthology editor before he became a magazine editor, was a 1972 volume called A Day in the Life.
Oh, right.
Published by Harper and Row. California Library System got a copy, I read it. If you want to see what Gardner Dozois looked like back then, if my indication of the rail thing looks like a speed freak, go look at go get a copy of A Day in the Life and look at the dust jacket photo, because it has him hair parted in the middle, looking, sitting in a room. There's enough to see in the room that he's living in absolute squalor.
Yes, it was.
But the volume, which is simply
Yes.
an anthology of stories, already published stories that the editor felt spoke extremely well to simply the texture of life, had in it a list of maybe 8 stories, he had novellas and novelettes in there, that you would never have guessed he liked from having simply read his work, which is all that I know of him. There was a novella by Gregory Smith. There was a story by Keith Roberts, a chunk of Pavan, I think.
Pavan, yes.
There's an R.A. Lafferty story. For Christ's sake, how could the person who written these stories not despise everything R.A. Lafferty stood for? Well, the answer was he had an extravagant admiration for Lafferty's talent. And this volume showed, as everything he has subsequently edited shows, the extreme Catholicity of his tastes. So long as it is good, it may be as temperamentally, artistically, philosophically uncongenial to his own as you like. And he has always been an extremely broad editor.
And I think, I remember him saying on a number of occasions how much he liked Cordwainer Smith, how much he liked Jack Vance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jack Vance is a particular hero of his.
Right.
Now,
you can see that in Strangers.
As an editor, you could sell him anything if it was good enough. But if it was good enough and it was bleak, or if it was good enough and it was borderline mainstream, he would buy it and then complain endlessly about it.
Really?
Yes.
So he actually wouldn't have bought his own stories.
No,
with
he
any
would have bought his own
enthusiasm.
stories.
But he would have given himself endless crap over it.
Yes.
The one sort of gap in Gardner's taste as an editor the only one I've spotted in 20 years is that he doesn't have a feel for satire as a reader. He doesn't get Sheckley. There's some other writers like that. He can look at it dispassionately and say, yeah, that's not bad, but it doesn't affect him on a gut level. That's the only thing I've really noticed.
He has a blind spot for the genius of George Zabrowski.
Well, that's only according to George, I'm sure.
Yes. In fact, that's where I heard it from. Okay.
But I see this as having been a quote-unquote competing editor for 4 or 5 years. And so I could see what stories that I turned down that Gardner picked up and vice versa. And the only thing that I ever spotted, didn't matter upbeat, downbeat, near future, far distant future, past, alternate history. The only thing I ever spotted was that I had a taste for satire and he didn't have that taste.
Well, that brings up an interesting point that, that Gardner is, as a person, one of the funniest people you'd ever
Yeah,
want to meet.
right.
But there's no humor in his stories.
Well, there is in some of the later stories, like a cat horror story.
Oh, well,
Well, yes.
okay.
Which,
but
And there are people-
thinking of the
there are
70s
people like
stories.
Ginger Buchanan who think all those stories are funny. Seriously, she thinks they were a riot.
Who does?
Ginger
He
Buchanan.
thinks all of Gardner's stories are funny?
Well, almost all of them.
And then he hit the cow with the sledgehammer.
We're all cracking up
Actually,
over
that
it.
cracks me up. It's Day by the Sea. That's actually
Yeah.
Kingdom
that is-
by the Sea.
A Kingdom
Yeah,
by the
that's
Sea.
my
That-
favorite story of his.
That is, I have to say,
The telepathic cow story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's not because Gardner said it was only science fiction if you assume the cow was a telepath. He admitted that.
but let's be honest. If you're infinitely brave, that's a very funny story.
It is, but it's also unforgettable. I remember reading it and being annoyed at it because it really wasn't science fiction, but I still have never forgotten it.
Yeah, the thought struck me the other day that, in a sense, to go with Gardner's telepathic cow theory, as it were, that in a sense it's a version of William Butler Yeats' The Song of Wandering Aengus with a cow instead of a fish.
I always thought it was a variant of William Faulkner's Afternoon with a Cow. But whatever. Yes.
which is satiric. So he probably didn't read it. I want to mention that Gardner is also a brilliant story doctor.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the point, yeah.
And in fact, when he became an editor, this was to pretty much everybody's benefit except mine, because I used to just I'd have a story half written, I'd say, Gardner, I'm kind of hung up here, and he would read through it, and he would tell me what to do to make it work. And he was invariably right. You'd see right through to what the story wanted, and he could tell you what the story wanted. And then, of course, once he was doing this for a living, was an unreasonable thing to ask of him, to give up a big hunk of his money-making time to do this.
In fact, I can tell a story that addresses two or three things you've talked about. I wrote a story called Arabian Wine, which was set in the 17th century and dealt with matters of its era. It was 40,000 words long, and my agent failed to sell it to anyone. And in some despair, I sent it to Asimov's, despite the fact that it was 40,000 words
And it
long.
was basically historical.
And there was no science fiction or
Right.
fantastical
Except
element in
it was about the introduction of coffee.
It was about the introduction of coffee. You could make an argument that it's very fairly, it was about science fictional things. It was about the impact of future technology on a strange culture. It was about alien substances that change the way your brain works. I don't want to talk about my story, but I sent it to Gardner in no hopes. He wrote back and said, "It's brilliant. By the way, how long is it?" And I had like printed it out to make it come out in as few pages as possible. And I said, "Well, if you want to believe my word checkers." And he said, "Okay, we just have to cut it by a quarter." And